I actually sent you two emails. Like, just ignore the first one. That's a wrong account. Okay. So just a quick recap. So do you guys remember the things that we discussed? Can someone close that door, please? Can someone just remind me what we did last class? Output decorator. Then what else? How does output decorator works? You make use of event emitter to send data from child to parent. So whatever that you store you into that variable which you decorate using output decorator is going to be an instance of event emitter, and you use a function called emit to emit that event, right? So then what else we discussed? Which one?
Content projection,
What is content projection?
pulling of data from component.
It's basically to make your code reusable. So you have a higher order component which you can use where you define your layout, and then you can use the concept of content projection, and you use a directive called ng-content, and you specify a selector so that the higher order component can receive data from the child, right? So then what else? Talked about output decorator, content projection. We discussed about routing. Yeah, from here we can go to the detail component and we can go back. And for that, how do you implement routing? We no. What is activated route? Exactly. Activated route is something which is, I mean, some service that is available in your router module, which helps you to receive or which helps you to retrieve value from the URL parameter, right? So the way that you implement routing is by you making use of the router module, and you call one function called for route, and you pass in an array of route configurations. And each route configuration becomes an object which has two properties, path and then component. Path is basically used to just come up with the URL pattern, and when the user navigated that URL pattern, which component you want to load, that's what you specify using the component property, right? And we also discussed about route configurations for your route path. When I mean, if you want to just specify that, you just give a blank value for the path, and you give star star value for the path. That is basically to capture all the invalid routes. So yeah, and if you really want to just use JavaScript to like navigate between the components, you can use make use of the router instance, and you can call one method called navigate, which will help you to like navigate between components using JavaScript. All right. Okay, cool. I also give you a small introduction about Node, right? So Node is basically a JavaScript runtime which helps you to write server logic. So I also discussed about a framework that we can use to develop Node applications, which is Express, and everything is packages in Node environment or Node runtime. So package.json is a main file which will help you to manage all your dependencies. And I also told you about these two properties, which is script and then dependencies. This dependency which is just in line 12 is your production dependency, and if you have any kind of dev dependency, it goes within the dev dependencies. So what exactly is dev dependency? Something when you imagine when you develop your application and now it is ready to deploy, so in that case you never want to have the production environment all the dev dependencies. So that's the reason why you just classify into two different types of dependencies, right? So for example, for dev dependencies could be testing, debugging packages and stuff like that. Okay. So this is your server file. And if you want to run any kind of Node applications, you just have to run one command, which is node followed by the file name. So we actually ran this command node hive space server.js, and it actually started the server in localhost port number 3000. So now the next thing is so now the next thing is how exactly can you configure an API? So if you really look at our application right here, where exactly is all the data coming from in this page? It is coming from the service file that we created, which is product service, and all the data is like really hard coded in that service. So if you open the service that we created, which is right here, so you can see that all the data is directly there within the client, and you would never want to do this in your production environment. So it has to come from your server by requesting an API. So that's exactly what we're going to do using this server.js file. So I'm going to create a route using the Express framework, and to create a route, there are three different functions which helps you to do that, three main different functions. It purely depends upon what type of a method you want to create. So whether you want to create an API for the GET request, or whether you want to create an API for the POST request, or whether you want to keep it open for both GET and POST. So to do that, there are three different functions you can make use of. So let's start with get. And the way that you access get method is by using this application object called app itself. And you can directly use app.get. You can use app.get, two parameters. The first one is the URL that you want to create. So in this case, I'm just going to name that URL as get products. You can name it anything you want, like it's purely up to you. And the second parameter is basically the callback. So you can just pass in a callback right here. And within this callback, you have access to two properties or two parameters. The first one is your request object, and the second one is your response object. So you have both request and response available in this. So anything to do with your request, let's imagine if you want to check something, check the validity of the request, you can work with this request object. And once you feel that everything is correct and the request is actually valid, and once you want to make any kind of response back to the client, you can make use of the response object. So what you can do is you can just use response object. I'm not checking for the validity right now. I'll show you how exactly you can do that. But let me just directly use the response object, and I want to make some data available to the client. So I'm using one function called send. So what this does is it will end the request and send data back to the client. So whatever that you return from here will be available when you try to request this URL. So if I go here and let me just copy this entire data from here. I'm just going to cut this. I'm just going to return a blank array right now, and I'm going to move this data completely to the server. So I'm just putting it right here. So now I have a server file which is running at port 3000, and when I request this, it should get me all these data. So let's see whether it works. So the only rule when you work with Node applications is whenever you make any changes, you're making changes to the server. So if it has to reflect, you have to restart your server. So I'm just going to do the same. So I'm just going to restart node space server.js. So again, it is running. So let's go in here, copy, and let's go to the browser. And I'm just saying localhost / get products. And if I request, I have this entire data coming from the server. So now the data is not anymore within the client, it's completely moved to the server. And the data is available in this URL endpoint, which is basically a REST endpoint. It's localhost straight port number 3000 get products. So the next question is, when I go back to this page, obviously we don't have any data to work with, so it is completely blank. And hopefully we don't have any kind of error also. Yeah, we don't have any kind of error. The only thing is data is not available. So somehow we have to request this data from the server, which is available in this URL endpoint, which is this. So to make API calls, I showed you how to do the same thing using JavaScript, right? So how do you make HTTP requests using JavaScript? You work with an object which is available in your browser itself, which is XML HTTP request, and you use certain methods to make the HTTP request and listen for the response. So for listening for the response, you make use of event listener, which is on ready state change. And whenever the response is ready, that function will get triggered, and you work with the response. The rule is the same here, but the only problem is you don't have to really work with the objects from the scratch. Instead, you have a wrapper function to work with in Angular. And one such module that helps you to work with HTTP requests is called HTTP client module. So you can go to app module. Let's bring that in our application. Just like we included forms module, you need to work with a new module right now, which is called HTTP client module. So I'm just going to make that part of my application by importing it right here. So I'm just importing this HTTP client module, which is available in Angular /common/HTTP. So I have included this, and I have to make this part of my application by putting this inside the decorator. So I'm using this imports array right here. So now I'm good. I have the support of HTTP client module within my applications, which means I can go to my product service and I can start making API calls. And the way that you do is you have to just get the reference of your HTTP client module, and you can call methods like get and post to make that happen. So you can just import this. I'm just saying import HTTP client from Angular /common/HTTP. And once you have this class, you just need to get a reference or get an instance of this class. So I'm just making use of constructor to do the same. So I'm just saying private HTTP equals HTTP. So I can directly work with this instance, and I can call the function called get, because it's the get request that we configure at the URL, at the server. So if you go to the server, we made use of get request, which means you can only accept or you can only request this URL using the get method. And that's exactly the reason why I'm using get method right here. So if you just give this, you can see that you're supposed to pass a parameter, which is the URL that you want to request. So which is basically available right here. Let me just copy this. So if I go in here and if I give this is a URL that I want to request. So now what really happens is, what kind of a process is this? When I make that function call, which is get, what kind of a function is it? Is it an asynchronous function or is it a synchronous function? What do you think that is? Is it a synchronous function? Wait, come again? No. It is an asynchronous function because you're making server calls using HTTP method, right? It is an asynchronous because you don't have any idea when your result will be available, or response will be available. So to handle asynchronous requests or asynchronous functions, I discussed about few concepts in JavaScript. What are they? You can use callback or you can use promise. So both works well, but for some reason, not for some reason, there are obvious reasons for it. So Angular came up with a new, not Angular, ECMAScript, actually the main specifications came up with a new way of handling asynchronous functions. And that concept is called observables. So now we have three different methods. We can either use callback, which is the most traditional way, and you have promise. And right after that, they came up with a new concept called observables. And the main difference between promise and an observable is when you make use of promise, if you notice that you just get one response, either it will be a resolve or it could be a reject, and that's the end of it. But observable make use of event emitter, so which means it is not restricted towards one response. It can have multiple responses. So this get method is going to return you not a promise instance, instead it is going to return you a observable instance. If it is a promise, you make use of then method or then function to get or to subscribe to the data. So here, if it is observable, instead of then, you make use of a different function called subscribe. And then you pass in a callback function and you directly get the data right here. Just saying console.log data. So all the methods, which is whether it is a get or a post in Angular from 2 onwards, they are not going to result promise instance, and they're going to work, or they're going to return you observable instance. So instead of then, you have to use the method subscribe, right? So now let's go back into this page. And if you have noticed, once the page got loaded, it actually printed all the data into my console. And if you really want to check or if you want to really debug the HTTP request, you can go to the network tab. You can see all the requests that it had made to the server to load this page. And out of which, if you want to filter your asynchronous request, you can click on this tab, which is XHR. And you can see that it just made one request, which is get products. And if you click this is exactly the URL that I requested to the server. And this is the response that I got from the server. So now I have an array of JSON objects to work with in the client. And the data is not in the client anymore. It has been requested from the server, and we are successful to get the data to the client, right? But still, the table is still showing blank. So how do I populate this data into the table so that we'll get all the products that's been listed in the table? So what change do you think I have to make here? Obviously, this service is being used within the products component, right? So let's open products component, which is this. And if you have noticed, I created an instance of product service right here. And within the ng on init, I call the function called this.productservice.getProducts. And that's exactly the function that we just modified. So if you go here, we have get products, and we are making an HTTP request, and we're getting the data. So if I do this, let's say if I go and just say return data, will that work? It won't work, right? Because it's an asynchronous function. When I call get products, it makes an asynchronous request and it immediately comes out from the function. So if I go back to this page, I still don't have the data. That is just because it is not returning me the data. Instead, it is returning some blank value or maybe an undefined, right? So how do I get this data somehow into my products component so that it can use it? So what you could probably do here is you just get rid of the subscription here and just return the observable instance from here. So I just got rid of the subscription for my get products. Instead, I made the observable object using the HTTP get method, and I'm returning the observable object to the products component right here or wherever it's been called. So which means what exactly is getting stored into this variable? Now, it won't be the data. Instead, it will be the observable object, right? So I cannot do this. Instead, what I have to do is I have to subscribe the data here. So I'll do just say dot subscribe data. And once I get the data, I'll just write this dot products equals data. So if I go back, I again have the data. So now the data is not in your service anymore. It is completely coming from the server by making use of HTTP request using the HTTP client module. Is that clear, everyone? Okay. So we also discussed about this thing, right? ng on destroy. So what is this mainly used for? Just like we have ng on it, which is a function that gets triggered once the component is getting initialized, you also have something called ng on destroy. So I believe I discussed about this function previously. What exactly is this function used for? Yeah, any kind of memory cleanup that you want to do, you can perform it here because this is a function that gets called once the component is not being used anymore, right? So what you could probably do is if you really look at this ng on it, you are actually making a subscription. So what really happens is even though the component is not used anymore, the subscription will be still active, which consumes memory. So what you can probably do is you can get rid of the subscription somehow. To get rid of the subscription, just like you use the method called subscribe, you can use a method called unsubscribe, which will help you to get rid of that subscription. And the way that you can work with this, you can just directly create a variable here. I'm just saying, let's say data subscription equals, let's say it's going to be of type any, and you don't have any variable. I can use this variable. I'll just say this dot subscription equals this. So what happens is I'll have an object to work with. So I can use this reference and I can call dot unsubscribe right here. So once the component is getting initialized, it is actually making a subscription here. And once the component is not being used anymore, it will just unsubscribe from that subscription using this method. Is that clear, everyone? Any doubts? Okay, I'll just show you one more thing in Node. I'll show you how exactly we can pull this data from your database, but that's a different topic altogether because before getting into that, I just need to give you a small introduction to MongoDB. So I'm not going to touch that today because I don't have MongoDB installed in this machine. So let me just quickly show you one more thing that you can do with your Node environment. So right now, this data is somehow getting into this server, and if you really look at it, I have configured this thing previously. That's the reason it is working. But most of you, when you try this, it might not work. The reason for that is my server, which is a node, which is running on port number 3000, and your Angular application is working on port number 4200, which means you're trying to request data from one domain, and the data is available in a different domain. So which means you're trying to do something called cross origin resource sharing, which refers to one package called CORS. CORS, cross origin resource sharing. So if by default, none of the servers will allow you to do that for obvious security reasons. So if any client is trying to request data, it has to be from the same domain itself. If it is anything coming from a different domain, the server will by default block it. So obviously, when you try to do this, it will definitely show an error saying that cross-origin resource sharing, I mean, some weird error it will show, something related to that. So what you have to do is you can just directly install one package called CORS itself. And if you really want to learn more about CORS, you can just go to npmjs.com and you can search for that package called CORS. So there are different ways you can use CORS. If you can click on this, the first thing is you have to install this using this command, and obviously just give that --save flag because it's a production dependency. It's not a dev dependency, it's a production dependency. And you can see that just like you're requiring any other package, you're requiring the package right here by using the require method. And you're using something called app.use. I'll get into what this thing is. So this will, what you're trying to do is you're trying to apply a middleware, which is CORS, into your existing application. That's how it works. So let me just quickly show you how exactly can implement that. And before that, let me just install that package. So I'm just going to execute this command called npm install CORS --save, because I want that to be listed in my package.json. So hopefully it must have listed. So let me just quickly open that. You see that now my application has one more dependency, CORS. It's there. So now let's go to server.js. I have to require that package within my application. So just like you required Express, you can do the same thing. So I'm just saying constant CORS equal require CORS. So now it is available in this variable called CORS. And as I said, this is a middleware. And the way that you can apply middleware into your existing existing Node application is by using a method called use itself. So you can use one function called app.use, and you can pass in a middleware function inside this. So what happens is when you require this method called CORS, it is actually returning your middleware function. And I'll show you how to create a custom middleware function also. But this is by default returning your middleware function, so you can directly go ahead and just call this right here. So now your application is open for accepting requests from any domain. Again, that's a big security breach. You should not do this. If you have google.com and you want to allow facebook.com to request your resource, you have to actually specify that I want to allow facebook.com to get the results or to access the response. So this is basically saying like even LinkedIn can access it. Any domain can access data from this. So what you can probably do is you can just make use of an object here. I mean, you can pass in an options object here, and you can specify which origin you want to allow by specifying the origin property here. And I'm saying I only want to accept this domain by default, and also localhost :4200. Just that. And this is, as I said, this is a global configuration. And this order really matters. If you put this line from line 5 to line 7 after this route, it will not work. So this order really matters, wherever you place your middleware. So when the request hits your server, it will actually go through this CORS first and check whether it can proceed to the next process in your pipeline. And if it doesn't allow, it will just block the request right away. That's how it works. I'll show you how exactly you can do that. So this is basically CORS for you. And as I said, there are different ways you can use CORS. So if you go here, this is one method, which I just showed you. And I also showed you how to pass origin. You can even put it at the route level by using this. So if you have app.get, and you can just directly put the middleware function here. So imagine if you have 10 different routes, out of which you only want to expose 3 different routes to the other domain. You can even put it at the route level, which is the best practice to do. And if you really feel that all the route is going to be available, or you want to make available all the routes to that domain, you just put it at the global level. All right, so now the application still, I hope the application is still working. So let me just try node server.js. Test refresh. I still have the data. And as I said, imagine you want to apply one more middleware, but you don't have any package. You have to come up with your own middleware function. So for you to create a custom middleware function, the way that you can do is you can just define your middleware. So I'm just saying middleware fn equals. It is as simple as saying you just create a function which has 3 parameters to this. That's your middleware function. any middleware function by default will have 3 parameters. The first one is request, then response, and then next. So any middleware function, just a custom middleware that I have just created. So any middleware, even your cars that you just applied will have by default 3 different parameters of function. So you have request, response, and next. And if I just write console.log just to check whether it is working, so I'm just saying console.log middleware function called. So now I've created the middleware and I want to apply this to my application. So all I have to do is I just use app.use and I'll just say middleware function. That's all I have to, we just have to just give this. That's all I have to do. So now what really happens is, now if I go and refresh, let's restart the server. If I go and refresh this, you can see that the data is not available anymore. But if you go to the server, you can see that middleware function actually called. So it actually executed this function, but for some reason it was not able to proceed to the next process, which is, getting the get products function to be involved. So what really happens is you can intercept any request that is hitting your server by just providing a custom middleware function. And you can check all the validity of that request. You can implement your custom logic to do that. So let's imagine you want to check the validity of the request by checking at one property in your header, request header. All you have to do is you can just directly use request.headers. That's the object. That's the request header object. You can check for any property, and if it just matches, what you have to do is you just have to proceed to the next process in your queue. By default, when you have a middleware function that's been executed, it will stop there. The request will stop, and it doesn't know where to go. And that's when you use the third parameter called next. All you have to just do is you just write, I'm just saying this console.log middleware function call, and right after this, I want to proceed to the next process. So I just call this function called next. So now it knows that after performing whatever steps that it has to perform here, it has to go to the next process in the queue, and you can always make this conditional. For some reason, you just did one if condition here and it failed, and what all you have to do is just say if it is false, all you have to do is you just say response.send, or let's say response.status. You can even set the status code for it. I'm just saying status 500, which is internal server error. I'm just saying send invalid request. That's how we can protect all your APIs within your node runtime. So this if condition is completely up to you. What do you want to do? You can do it there, like by checking all the validity of your request. So if this satisfies, it directly proceed to the next. Otherwise, it goes into this and it'll just send an error request back. If you really want to check whether it works, you can just restart the server again. Let's go back into this, and if I refresh this, oops, I give this false if false. Oh yeah, let me just comment this out. Come on. Let me just start this. Okay, so you just produce this internal server error. That's basically the thing that we just given here. So just make this conditional. There's something wrong with the condition that I have provided. So just make this conditional and just pass this. If everything goes well, you can just directly use the next function to proceed to the next process in the queue. So let's try running this again. So now if I go back to this page, I still have all the products. Is that clear? Okay. Okay, that's pretty much I want to talk about that. Definitely in the next class, I'll show you how exactly we can get this data from your MongoDB. Okay. So that's pretty much it. So let's just let the server run there, and let me just get rid of all the node files from here. Okay. Okay. So now when I go to this page, when you look at this page, we have like 3 different pages in my application right now. Not 3, 2 different pages. One is the products list page, and from there I'm able to navigate to the product detail page as well, right? So what if I want to make the rendering of this page conditional? I really want to make sure that if the user is logged in, then I want to show these pages. And if the user is not logged in, I want to redirect him to the login page or some other error pages. So to do that, I'm just going to create one more component because we are out of component. We only have 2 components. So I'm going to create a new component called welcome. So I'm just saying ngg component, let's say /welcome. So I created that component. It has updated the app module, which means I can use this. So let's go here and just add that within the routing so that I can access that. So let's go in here. So I'm just going to just get this import statement. And I just want to define one more routing for this. So I'm just saying path welcome. I want to load the component which is welcome. So now we define one more routing rule for welcome component. So which means I should be able to view the contents of that welcome page by going into the route, which is localhost /4200/welcome. So let's try whether it works. So if I go to welcome, it actually loaded the content from welcome component, right? So it just says welcome works. So you can always get some default content for your welcome page. You can go to getbootstrap.com, navigate to the version number. Not necessary. I don't want to make it look blank, so I'm just going into this. And you can go here called Jumbotron. That's one component that you can use. If you want a layout just which looks like this, you can just copy paste this code into your welcome component HTML page. So instead of making it look like really blank, you can just have something on the other. So right here, oh yeah. So I'm just saying, welcome to my page. Hello, everyone. So if I go back to this, have the welcome page which looks like this. Okay. So now it gets back to business. So what I have to do is, like when I try requesting my products page and products detailed page, I want to make sure that the user is logged in. And if the user is not logged in, I have to throw him back to the welcome page. So normally what you'll always do is when you make a request for your login, you check the validity of that user at the server. And if you feel that, okay, you have a record in your database saying that this username and password actually matches, you give a positive response back to the client saying that this user is a valid user. So the moment that you get that, you make use of some sort of a token and you store that token in your client browser. It can be in the form of cookie. It can also use storage API of your HTML5. Didn't I talk about storage API? Okay, yes, I did. So you can directly store that in your local storage or session storage or what, not session storage, local storage, and you can read the value, which will help you to understand whether the user is logged in or not, right? That's how normally in every web application works. So either you rely on cookie or you rely on storage API. So even before getting into that, I need a service which helps you to do all these checks. So what I'm doing is, instead of writing all these things within the component, I'm going to create a new service for it. So I'm going to name that as auth. So I'm creating a service called ngg service. I'm going to put that within the auth module. It's just a regular service. I just want to create a function which will help me to check whether the user is logged in or not. That's all it is. So I have created the service. So which is inside the auth. I'm just going to just create one function called check login, and it is going to return true all the time. So when I call this function, if it returns true, which means the user is logged in, I can proceed loading the page. And if I return false from here, which means the user is not logged in, so somehow I have to capture that state and throw him back to the login or the welcome page, right? This is clear till now, everyone? Okay. So the way that you can protect a route in Angular is by making use of a new component called guards. So you have a route and you have a guard, and guard is a special type of class which will help you to protect that route, right? And you don't have to create it. You can directly create it using the CLI. So I'm just trying to create that. You can just say ngg instead of service component.pipe. You can just say guard, and I'm going to directly put it within the auth itself. So I'm just saying auth/auth. So what this does is it will create a file called auth.guard.ts within the auth directory. If you just hit enter, as I said, it just have auth.guard.ts, which is there inside your directory. Clear. Let me just run ngserve. And if you open that file that just got created, which is auth.guard.ts, there are so many things within this. You don't have to worry about everything. You just have to look into one function which is automatically available within the class, which is called canActivate. As the name suggests, it actually means can Angular activate that route. That's exactly what that function means. And again, if you look at that function, it is always returning true, which means by default, it is always active. And you can always make this return statement conditional based on doing some checking. So if you call that function within the service that we just created, which is called check login, if that function returns false, you can return false from here. It will prevent the component from loading. And if you return true, it will obviously proceed loading the component. That's all it is. So instead of directly writing the condition here, I'm just going to import that service that I just created. So if the service that I created is auth service, and for injecting a service as a dependency, what are the steps that we have to perform? I have a service and I want to inject that service as a dependency in some part of my application. So what is the step? You have to first import that service, and then you use a provider property to make it part of your application or make it part of that respective piece of code. And then you then you work with an instance by using the constructor. So the service that we created previously was product service. And if you remember, we actually injected directly within the products component itself. That is just because I didn't want to make it global. So right now we have a different service called auth service. And definitely it is not something that can be used locally. It has to be globally available because it is an authentication. Almost everything in your application needs this service. So instead of putting it within a particular component, I'm directly putting it within, where do you think I have to put? Exactly, I have to go and inject it within the app module. So let me just quickly import that. I'm just saying import auth service from auth/auth service. And I have to put it within the providers array within my app module. So now this service is globally available across my application, right? So which means I can directly use it within the guard also. So I'm going to inject it here within the guard. I'm just saying I want an instance of auth, so auth service from auth service.ts file. I have to work with an instance of this because this is a class. I need an instance of the same to call the method called check login. So how do I do that here? Do I have a constructor here? No. So you can directly create one. You can just say constructor, and I can say private not HTTP, which is auth service. I can always make this conditional. I'm just going to just call this method right here, and I'm just going to say this dot auth service dot check login. When I call this function, depending on what it is trying to return, I'll make this condition. So I'm just directly write if auth service, then return true. Else I will return false. And just by returning false, what happens is you will feel like the page is broken. The component doesn't load and it will stop. So it looks like it's like a broken page. So obviously I don't want to look my application. I don't want to have my application to look like that. So what I have to do is if it is returning false, I have to redirect the user from that page to the welcome component. So how do I do that? Here, if I want to redirect that user or redirect that control to a certain URL pattern, how do I do that? I need an instance of the router component. So I'm just going to include it here. I need an instance, so I'm going to create an instance right here. Router, and here I can just write this dot underscore router dot navigate and just give welcome. So since my auth service is returning true, it will go into this function, it will return true, which means it will load the page, right? So if I go back into this, if I try products, it is still loading. It will even load my detail page as well, right? It is completely loading everything. So, but let's try to return false from my auth service. Say if it is auth service, it is still loading. That is the reason for that is we created the auth guard, everything here, but we haven't related our route with this class. So if you really look at it, this is my route configuration, and we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different routes, and we created an auth service somewhere, auth guard somewhere there, and it is not even related here, right? So how do I relate my auth guard that I created with the components that I really want to protect? So the way that you can do is you can use one property called can activate itself within the route. So any route that I want to protect, you just specify can activate. And if you remember, this is the same method that we used within the auth guard that we created. And that's how it gets related. So you can just say can activate, and you can pass in an array. And within the array, I have to specify the class it has to look up for that method. And the class is auth guard. So now your product component knows that, or your product routes knows that if it has to activate that route, it has to first go and check for this can activate method. And depending on what we have written there, it will make sure whether it proceeds loading the page or it will, it will handle an exception. So if I just copy this for the detail page, I can just copy this and put it right here. So now out of the 5 routes that we have, 2 are protected, which is the list page of the products and the detail page of the products. So if I refresh, it is returning true. Sorry, I think, wait, where was the guard? Okay, let me just restart the server again, saying gserve. Okay, so now when if I try to request products, it actually redirected me back to the welcome page. Even if I try something like products slash the detail page of this is a URL for the detail page. If I hit enter, it again throws me back to the welcome page. That is just because that function is returning true, which means function is returning false, which means the user is not logged in. And if I just change this back to true, and if I save this, if I go back now, I'm on my welcome page. And from here, if I want to navigate to the products, it loads. And if I want to go to the detail, I can click here. It still loads the detail page. If I go back, it still works. Obviously, you will never write something like true or false there. It has to be like dynamic. I'll again show you how exactly you can do that. But till now, is it clear how to configure your component, how to create routing so that you can navigate across components? How do you protect a route? How to configure an API in your node so that you can get data from your server. These are the things that we covered till now. Is that clear for everyone? Any doubts? Anyone? Till now. Is everyone good? Okay. All right. So let me just close at this. Okay, so now I'm going to create a new component, which is going to help me to create a login page. So till now, we completely relied on the data that we set from that function, which is true or false. And depending on that, it knows whether it has to load the page or it has to go back to the welcome page. So now let's create a login page. And from there, let's see how exactly we can enter username and password, and from there, how to take the control forward, right? So I'm just saying ngg component, let's give it as auth, and I'm giving that as login. So it should create a component called login component within the auth directory, and also directly updated to my app module, so it's everything good. So let me just quickly run the server, and let's work with the login component. So right here, I have the login component, which is this, and this is the TypeScript file for this. And this is the default content of my login page. I want to quickly get some static HTML, so I'm going to go to CSS here in the Bootstrap directory, and if you go to forms, you'll directly get a layout for a login page. You can directly use that. So I'm just going to copy this and put it right here. I just need email and password. I don't need these two things. So I'm going to get rid of this. And let's put this as primary. So, and again, first of all, check whether it's working. So I have to even go and configure a route for this if I want to access that. So I'm just going to quickly create a routing for this. So I'm just saying path will be login, and the component that I want to load when I go to the login component is obviously login component itself. So I created a component, I configured the routing so that I can access that route. So if I go here and if I try to access this, I have this login page right here, right? So I don't want to show it like this. Instead, I want to just put this inside a panel. So how do you think what do you think I have to do within this page to make that happen? I want to wrap this inside a panel. We already have created a component called app panel box. So let's try to use that. So it becomes app-panel-box. And here I can give a label for this. I'm just saying panel-title. So I'm just saying login. And I can give a div, and I can just give class panel, or not class, panel-body. And I can put this entire code within this. Save it. So now I should have the panel. It looks good. All right, so now what I want to do is, I mean, right now we are not going to make it completely dynamic. The only thing that I'm going to do is I'm just checking for the validity of username and password, and I want to make sure that the user has entered admin for both username and password. So if I type in admin and admin here, and if I click submit, I want to check the validity of this. And if it is admin and admin, I want to redirect the user to the welcome page or any of those pages. So what do you think I have to do? What is the first step to get to that stage? What do you think the first thing that I have to do here? We need an event binding first of all, which is the event binding for this button. So I'm going to attach an event binding here. I'm going to name that as click, and I'm going to create a function called login. Right? So I have a function right here. So now let's go and define this function within the login component. So I'm just going to create this here. And the best practice will be don't write this entire thing here. This function is just there to receive the value of those input fields. And the entire thing has to be there or included within your service. And that's the reason why you're using service. And especially anything related to authentication, there are multiple places where you use it. So instead of writing your entire logic here, I'm going to move this logic into my service. I'm just going to quickly get the auth service here. Auth service from should be // auth service. I need to get a reference of this. So I'm just saying private auth service equals this. And I'm assuming that I have a function called login within the auth service. So all I do is in this function, I just pass whatever that I get from the form, I'll directly pass it to the auth service, a login function within the auth service. I just write something like this auth service login. not check login, it has to be login. It's showing error. That's because my service doesn't have this method. So now, like, if I have to call this, I obviously have to pass the value of username and password or email and password to this function, right? So how do I receive or how do I fetch the value from this input when I click that button? What do you think I have to do? When I click that button, the function login will definitely get called, but I have to receive the value of username and password within the function so that I can pass it to the login function within the auth service. Exactly. You can use ng model to bind the data into an application variable, right? So I can directly use ng model, and I'm saying I want to create a variable called username, and I can do the same thing for password also. I can do this. So the only problem or the only limitation with this approach is if you want to deal with the values from coming from that form, you have to actually deal with two different variables. One is username and the other one is password. So instead of, there's no what do you call that, error that will pop up if you do this. It is completely fine. The only problem is you have to deal with multiple variables. So instead of doing that, you can always come up and create a new variable here. I'm just saying auth form, and I'm going to just set the variable type as any, and I'm giving an object here. The moment that you do this, you always have the option to use this object, and you can push both the values into one single variable. And the way that you can do is you can directly just say, instead of username, you can just say auth form dot username. So it will bind that value to that property called username within the auth form object. You can do the same thing for password as well. Auth form dot password. So now you only have one variable to like deal with, which is auth form, which is an object which has properties username and password. And obviously, it is always mandatory that when you work with ng model, you're supposed to pass the name attribute also, otherwise it'll throw an error. I'm just saying username here and password here. So now your form is completely ready to receive value. So let's go to this login component. And how exactly can I access the value, or how exactly can I access the value right here? Let's comment this and let's use console.log to check whether the values are receiving correctly. Exactly, I just have to write this dot user, or sorry, this dot auth form. So everything works fine. When I click that button, I should be able to receive an object which has properties username and password. So let's go and try that, and let's see whether it works. I'm just going to log in. Oops, I think I made a typo here. What was that? Oh yeah. Okay, so let's try login. Okay, so let's open the inspect. I'm just trying to give admin and admin. If I click submit, I'm getting an object right here, which has properties username and password, both having the values that I entered into this text box. So which means I can directly pass these values to the function by just giving this variable. So we don't have this function, obviously we have to go and create this. Just doing this. So now I can go and define this function or declare that function within the service, and I can check the validity of it, right? So let's go into this, click login. No, where was it? Yeah, I haven't opened that. It's right here. Okay, let's go and create that function. So I'm just saying login, and obviously has parameters. I'm just giving credentials. So now if I go back to login component, the error is gone because now we declare that function. So now that error is completely gone from the component. So what I can do is I can just check for if credentials dot username equals admin and credentials dot password equals admin. It's a return true here. Else, I'll just give an alert saying that invalid credentials. So, but the thing that we have to do is if this matches and if the username and password is both admin, I have to redirect the user to my welcome page, right? So how exactly can I do that? I can just import the router from Angular / router, get the reference by putting it inside the constructor, and use this right here. So I'm just saying, oops, this dot router dot navigate welcome. So that entire process is complete now. So when I give username and password, when I click login, if it is correct, it will actually send the user to the welcome page. If not, it will actually pop up an error and it will stop there. It doesn't proceed anywhere. It will stay in that same page itself. So obviously this thing that you're doing right here, it is not supposed to be done within the client. It has to be done at the server level. So obviously we make an API call and we'll check the validity. We'll see how exactly we can do that later. So now let's see whether it works. So I'm just going to give admin and admin. I click submit. It actually took me to the welcome page. So now if let's go back to this login again and let's try with an invalid thing. So I'm just giving something like this. If I click submit, the invalid pop-up invalid credentials and it stopped there. It doesn't proceed anywhere. Is that clear, everyone? Okay. All right, so the next step would be definitely once we have this username and password matched, we have to store it somewhere in the client so that even if I refresh the page, I should still be able to understand the user is logged in. So as I said, either you can make use of cookie or you can directly make use of your local storage or storage API within your HTML5. All that you have to do is you just write local storage. If it is local storage that you're relying on, you just write local storage dot set item. And I'm just setting a variable within the local storage. I'm just setting that is logged in. I'm just setting that to true. So now when I log in, it will actually set this variable. You're supposed to pass only string, so I'm just passing string. That's the reason I was showing that error. So all I have to do now is when I give username and password, it'll set within my storage API, it set a new variable called is logged in. And next time when I refresh the page, if I want to really make sure that the user is still logged in, I only have to go and check this variable. And if that variable is present and if it has a true value, which means the user is still logged in, so that I can proceed loading my page. So instead of directly returning true here, you can always return local storage dot get item, and you can just pass in is logged in. So now the check login is not like relying on the hard-coded value. It is actually relying on the proper state of your application that is reading from the API. Is that clear, everyone? Okay. That's pretty much I want to discuss for today. So next day or just Monday, I'll give you an introduction about MongoDB, what type of a database that is and how to work with this thing, work with the database by saving and querying data. And I'll also show you how exactly you can connect your node server to your MongoDB to like automate that process. Okay. So if you really want to do, or if you want to really experiment the same in your machine, you can directly go to mongodb.com and you can download that depending on your operating system that you have. You can go to mongodb.com. That's the official website for MongoDB, and you can try it for free. Oh, this website has changed a bit. So yeah, just download it from here. And if you really don't want to install it, what you can also do is one more alternative that you have is you can go to MLab. That's a cloud solution that you have for MongoDB. You can go to MLab. I don't think you have to give your credit card details. It's free. You'll get like 500 MB of free space, which is more than enough for you to create a project and try most of the things. I believe 500 MB or 1 GB you'll get. What?
Only few space they will give. We need to create the table according to that space in this MLab.
I didn't understand.
Like they will give the specified amount of space.
Right. So I mean, it's a complete solution, like cloud solution for MongoDB. It's not a cloud service as such. It's like a kind of cloud for MongoDB. So what they'll do is like you can create an account and you can start creating databases, and within the database you can start creating your tables and stuff like that. So just if you're not able to complete, or if you're not able to like really guys, just 1 second. If you're not able to install this in your machine, you can at least create this account in MLab. That will also help you. So you don't need to have that dependency in your machine. You can directly rely on this as well to try out stuff that we discuss in the class. Okay. All right, that's pretty much I want to discuss for today. I'll see you all on Monday. And one more thing is, as an assignment for